Friendly fire, 5 Americans killed by their comrades. We have the response from the Pentagon. The right to worship, what your Congress is doing to protect religious freedom.
It is a myth that rape is an inevitable part of conflict.
A look at Angelina Jolie's fight to end sexual violence. And battling a disease that affects millions, the effort to make Alzheimer's a thing of the past. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 10th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. I'm Brian Patrick with our EWTN News Nightly team. We begin tonight looking at news now. In one of the worst friendly fire incidents of the war in Afghanistan, 5 American Special Forces troops have been killed in an airstrike. Tonight, the U.S. Defense Department and NATO leaders are poring over details, trying to figure out how this happened. Wyatt Goolsbee is at the Pentagon tonight. Wyatt, what's the status of that investigation?
Brian, officials here at the Pentagon are still sorting through many of the details in last night's airstrike, which left 5 American soldiers and 1 Afghan soldier dead. But they have confirmed to us that those troops were engaged in a security operation in southern Afghanistan when the attack happened. One Afghan official says they were attacked in the southern Zabul province, not far from the city of Kandahar. Police say the soldiers were on a joint NATO mission coming back to their base when Taliban militants started firing at them. They called for air support, but ultimately they were the ones killed in the bombing. The attack is being noted as one of the worst cases of coalition friendly fire during the 14-year war. Now, this also comes months before U.S. combat troops are scheduled to leave Afghanistan. Security has been a priority this week in that country as Saturday marks the final day of voting for the new Afghan president. Brian?
All right, thank you. Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the Pentagon tonight. And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Things have calmed down somewhat after a gunman set his sights on a high school near Portland, Oregon this morning. Authorities say the suspect went into the school with a rifle and killed a student. He also injured a teacher who was treated at the scene. The gunman was later found dead. As police investigate, school administrators spent the day focusing on reuniting students with their parents. An unrelated gun was found during the evacuation and search. Police did take someone into custody in connection with that second gun. The Supreme Court is set to rule on the controversial HHS mandate later this month. Today, the religious liberty debate raged at a congressional hearing. Our Jason Calvi reports from the Capitol. Jason?
The congressional subcommittee's topic today, Brian, threats to religious liberty. One of the main topics was on the Affordable Care Act's contraception mandate. These two men don't agree on much, including the mandate. Americans United for the Separation of Church and State's Reverend Barry Lynn. On the other side of this debate and most religious liberty issues is Alliance Defending Freedom, Senior Counsel Greg Baylor.
Americans, as you know, exercise their religious freedom not just on Sunday morning in a church or in their synagogues or in their mosques, but in everyday life, including in their businesses. That's why their positions are so concerning.
If everyone is exempted from the laws that apply to everyone else because of their religious beliefs in a country that has 2,000 different religions, we'd be courting anarchy. And I'm afraid that that's what folks on the other side of this debate, in fact, will end up with.
The Supreme Court will rule soon on the case of 2 for-profit companies owned by devout Christians, Hobby Lobby Craft Stores and Conestoga Wood. Owners of both say the birth control mandate forces them to violate their faith by making them provide health care coverage for abortion-inducing drugs. These two bitter opponents facing off today, weighing in on this major issue of the HHS mandate. Now we're waiting for the Supreme Court to weigh in, expecting the ruling by the end of this term, the end of June. But it could come any day. The Supreme Court will be issuing rulings on Thursday and next Monday. We don't know yet when these rulings will come down. Brian?
All right, Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill, thank you. Our news team is watching the Supreme Court closely. We'll bring you the justice's ruling as soon as it comes down. Well, we're getting new information this evening about the controversial prisoner exchange for Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl's freedom. The Obama administration now says it finalized the exchange just one day before it actually happened. This new statement is in response to critics who point out that the administration is required to give Congress 30 days notice. Despite the revelation, the administration has a long way to go in its quest for public approval of the prisoner swap. A new Pew Research Center USA Today survey says 43% of Americans think the exchange was wrong. Compared that with 34% who say it was the right thing to do. Not the least of the critics is House Speaker John Boehner.
We don't negotiate with terrorists. And the fact is that we have violated that policy, and as a result, we've made Americans less safe here and all around the world.
A top Pentagon spokesman gave an update on Bergdahl today. He said the soldier is still in military hospital in Germany. He would not say when Bergdahl might return to the United States. Land wars with Russia and political turmoil aren't the only problems in Ukraine. We have just learned tonight that a massive internal tax scam has robbed that country of billions of dollars in tax revenue. Ukraine's new tax chief says his predecessor planned the theft at this table in a secret soundproof vault at the tax ministry in Kiev. The deputy tax minister says the fraud involved more than 100 phantom firms. They were created to decrease the tax liability of legitimate businesses and funnel money to corrupt officials. In the end, Ukraine lost $11 billion over the course of 3 years. Well, every Tuesday, bookstores stock their shelves with the latest releases. And if you're into politics, this week the choice is easy or hard. Hard Choices by Hillary Clinton hits bookstore shelves today. The publisher calls it an insider's account of Clinton's time as Secretary of State and how that time influenced her view of the future. Tonight, we looked at the effect on her own political future. Alexandra Jaffe, a campaign reporter for The Hill, joins us now. You've written that Hillary Clinton's shadow campaign is now over. What do you mean by that?
Well, for a long time now, she's been the non-candidate candidate, leading in every poll, widely expected to run in 2016, but not putting herself out there, living largely a private life. That all changes now. That all changes today. She's launching a wide-ranging nationwide book tour. She's doing a media blitz with a number of, big-name interviews, and will be very active in the 2014 elections. So that's all in preparation of a final decision on 2016, which we can expect to come next year.
Does she just want to sell a lot of books, or is she going to run for president?
She would probably sell a lot of books either way. Every sort of information that we can get, every former associate has said, yes, she's in. But publicly, she hasn't said that yet, and she doesn't have to, really, until 2015. So we have to wait and see.
Why do you think she lost? Why does she think she lost in 2008, and what would she do differently?
She addressed this actually last night on her first big interview of this media blitz, and she said, I lost because I didn't have a strategy. She basically said she had taken her initial frontrunner status for granted and hadn't worked as hard as maybe she ought to have done. And she said if she runs this time around, she'll run as an underdog. She will work, as hard as she needs to get the nomination, and we can expect to see that from her going forward.
She is certainly haunted by the Benghazi attack and her response to it, or the way it was handled. How do you think she's dealing with that? Or she's going to have to deal with it in the campaign.
Right, exactly. Republicans aren't going to let that go. They have multiple ongoing investigations, and she, addressed that last night as well in an answer that I don't know went far enough. She was pressed by ABC News' Diane Sawyer about what she would have done differently, and she didn't really have an answer. She didn't say either way whether she would have done anything differently. She stood by her handling of the attacks, and that's something that Republicans last night were already sort of pummeling her for and will continue to do so.
That's obviously part of their strategy. Do you think it's going to work?
Well, they always run the risk of overplaying their hand, of hammering something that, there is no there. They find no smoking gun. They've been investigating this for years and still haven't figured out what really went wrong. And there's a chance that, voters are fatigued with this and think that Republicans are, chasing a wild goose of sorts. So if they continue to push that, if there are no new developments, there's a real risk that it won't work and it could, in fact, backfire.
Well, it's been gone for a long time from the headlines, but if she runs, or when she runs, this scandal in the White House with her husband is bound to come back up. Is that going to hurt her, or is the fact that she was the first lady, will that help her?
It could really go either way, and we're already actually seeing it crop up. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who is also likely to run, has brought it up as an example of Democratic hypocrisy because Hillary Clinton stood by, her husband despite him sort of, engaging in inappropriate relations. And we'll see. She's been very sort of aloof when asked about it. She said that she has no hard feelings and wishes Monica Lewinsky well. But there's always a chance that Republicans will try to use that against her. Again, though, they run the risk of overplaying their hand.
Don't you think she earned a bit of compassion from the American people through that ordeal?
Absolutely.
That could make a difference, too.
When she left office, she was very popular for how she handled that, or rather when Bill Clinton left office. So that's sort of an aspect of her personality that I think people find attractive and affectionate. It's a matter of, 2 decades later, how do they view it?
Alexandra Jaffe from The Hill, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Well, sticking with politics for a moment, there are 5 congressional primaries going on today around the country. People are voting in Maine, Nevada, North Dakota, South Carolina, and Virginia. The race that's getting the most attention is in Virginia's 7th District. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor is facing Tea Party challenger David Bratt. Coming up, Alan Holdren talks with a Vatican delegate to the Pope's prayer for peace in the Middle East. Plus, preventing sexual violence, how one celebrity is using her fame to raise awareness. From the official Twitter feed of Pope Francis today, let us pray for all victims of sexual violence and conflict and those working to end this crime with the hashtag #TimeToAct. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick on Tuesday, the 10th of June. Sexual violence is not typically described as a weapon of war, but that's how organizers of an international conference addressing rape in conflict zones are framing it. Actress Angelina Jolie and British Foreign Secretary William Hague are co-hosting this London summit. They're bringing an air of celebrity to the somber plight of sex crime victims.
We must send a message around the world that there is no disgrace in being a survivor of sexual violence, that the shame is on the aggressor. We must work together in new and unprecedented ways across borders and religions, bringing governments and people together.
More than 100 countries are represented at the summit. One of the hopes is for better prosecution of those who commit sexual crimes during military conflict. Many victims of rape don't have a platform to raise awareness and seek justice, but some celebrities and other brave women are going public with stories of sexual assault in their families. EWTN News Nightly's Catherine Elliott has their story.
Miss Pennsylvania USA recently revealed that she was conceived out of rape. It was a busy day like this one in Pittsburgh when her mother was attacked at knife point at age 19. Now her daughter is determined to use the Miss USA platform to educate people about sexual assault. Valerie Gatto says, "Being a child of rape, not knowing who my father is, not knowing if he's ever been found, most people would think it's such a negative situation. But I believe God put me here for a reason. You can't let your circumstances define your life." That's an inspiring message, but the statistics about rape, whether on the street in the U.S. or in war-torn regions elsewhere, are sobering. It's especially personal for Layla Damon, whose mother is one of at least 25,000 victims of sexual violence in post-war Yugoslavia.
My mother, who was Bosnian Muslim, was raped repeatedly in the concentration camps at the time, and she became pregnant.
Layla's mother gave her up for adoption to a couple from the UK who filmed her in Bosnia.
I could kind of understand her reasons for putting me up for adoption. I can't imagine the ordeal that she went through.
Now Layla is telling her story.
I'm Layla Damon. I was born in Sarajevo during the war in '92.
In London, as part of a 4-day summit on sexual violence in war zones.
Out of so many rapes that went on in Bosnia, I think there were only 12 that actually went to court. It's probably my birth mum's story, this kind of sense of injustice, that nothing ever really got done to help her.
By speaking out, Layla is helping to raise awareness about the disturbing legacy of sexual violence. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Catherine. And one of the groups fighting sexual violence is International Justice Mission. Gary Haugen, the founder and president of IJM, joins us tonight. Gary, how common is rape in the countries where your organization is active?
Well, unfortunately, it's very common. IJM's teams on the ground in the developing world serve thousands of individual victims of sexual violence. The World Health Organization calls it an epidemic, but it's one that stays below the surface. And it's everyday violence. It just happens among very common people. I was in Peru visiting a town that had, just a small town of 70,000 people, that had 50 cases of rape reported to the medical clinic in just 5 days. This is an epidemic that stays below the radar, so we need to do what this London summit is doing, and that is raise attention to it and then begin to address the impunity that allows it to happen.
In those places, what are the justice systems like? Are they adequately addressing this issue?
Well, this is the primary breakdown and the primary explanation for why there is so much sexual violence, and that is the overwhelming amount of impunity. In Bolivia, for instance, if you sexually assault a child, you're at greater risk of slipping in the shower and dying than you are of ever being convicted for that. So there is a state of lawlessness now for the very poor in the developing world, and those who are most vulnerable are women and girls, and they're vulnerable to sexual violence.
And you're advocating for the poor here in Washington. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a very important day for us. It's our advocacy day here up on Capitol Hill. One of the forms of sexual violence that's perhaps ugliest is actually a business, the business of sex trafficking. And so we are working with members of Congress up on the Hill who are very eager now to support legislation that will prioritize human trafficking and making sure that the voice and values of the American people are on the side of those who are most vulnerable. And so we've got about 300 advocates up on the Hill meeting with about 80 members of Congress today, and we think we're going to see some big action out of that.
Well, you've written this best-selling book, The Locust Effect. It links poverty with violence. Explain that link for us, if you would.
Well, it's important to realize that just as hunger is endemic to being poor and disease and homelessness, also violence is endemic to being poor, in the way that also violence descends upon the poor like the locusts do when they descend to destroy the crops. Predatory violence destroys everything the poor are trying to move forward with. Education's a great example. They now say that if we can get girls educated, that can do a tremendous amount to help them get out of poverty. But now studies are showing that one of the primary reasons girls are not going to school in the developing world is violence, especially sexual violence. So the book really shows that we need to address the violence if we're ever going to really address poverty, and it also shows a pathway of hope to see the violence end.
All right, The Locust Effect by Gary Haugen. Thanks for joining us tonight, Gary.
Thanks so much.
Well, there is confusion in Wisconsin about whether court clerks can legally issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Last week, a federal judge struck down a state law that says marriage is between one man and one woman, but the judge didn't go so far as to give the go-ahead to clerks to start issuing marriage licenses. So some clerks have issued licenses. The really confusing issue now is how will the state deal with couples who exchange vows if and when the decision is reversed by a higher court? Well, Madison Bishop Robert Morlino is weighing in. He says we should have respect for all, but, quote, in striking down the constitutional amendment in our state which protects marriage, the court has, once again, shaken one of the most precious and essential building blocks of our civilization. Israel has a new president tonight. The Israeli parliament today chose Reuven Rivlin to lead as president. He's a veteran politician who supports the Jewish settlement movement. He succeeds Shimon Peres, a Nobel Peace Laureate and star of the international stage. Peres just met on Sunday with Pope Francis and Palestine's president in the Vatican Gardens, where they prayed for peace. Well, during Sunday's moving prayer service, the St. Francis Prayer for Peace was read in Arabic. Alan Holdren is joined in Rome tonight by the Vatican delegate who read the prayer. Good evening, Alan.
Good evening, Brian. We're here in Rome just days after the invocation for peace with Pope Francis in the Vatican Gardens and the President of Israel and the President of Palestine, where they prayed for peace in the Holy Land. And we're here with an official member of the Vatican delegation, Margaret Karam. Margaret, you're from Israel. You were born in Haifa. You're a Christian there in the Holy Land, and you were here for this special moment. Can you tell us what it was like for you to be there?
It has been really a wonderful moment, very touching, because I never thought I'll be present in this occasion. But I was invited by the Vatican as a member of the Focolare movement, and I'm living now in Italy. And to be there after I have lived 25 years in Jerusalem and to be present at this prayer was like a dream that was becoming true. To see this gesture of peace becoming an invocation from God to pray for peace, that was really very, very impressive.
And can you tell me what sort of an effect do you think this will have? The Pope is the head of the smallest state on earth. How much can this influence a situation like the one in the Holy Land?
I think that was a prophetic sign. And I think the Vatican and the Pope has a lot and has a big impact on the whole world. And I feel that also from the Holy Land, from Israel and from Palestine, that they have followed this event very actively. They looked at the TV in Hebrew, in Arabic. People were praying for this moment, and they felt that the church has something to give, to support, and they lived it in a very concrete way. They were praying with the Pope at that moment, no matter if they were Jewish or Muslim or Christian, and they felt that the Pope and the Catholic Church in this moment were near to the people, and they were not forgotten. And even if there's still conflict, but there's someone that is thinking of them. And it was very moving also to see that there was also the Patriarch Bartolomeo, and also representative of the Lutheran Church from Jerusalem, Bishop Yunan, and also the Patriarch, Orthodox Patriarch. And this, I think, meant not only ecumenical event also, but also for the whole churches in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land, and also from the point of view of Muslims and Christians, it meant a lot. And I think it will have an impact in the whole world.
Great, well, we sure hope so. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Back to you in Washington, Brian.
All right, what an amazing woman, and a great opportunity she had to be part of that wonderful celebration of peace. Well, U.S. bishops are now in New Orleans for their spring meeting. Louisville Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, the USCCB president, celebrated Mass for his brother bishops this morning. Tomorrow, they'll get down to business, discussing marriage and the economy, as well as poverty and the new evangelization. EWTN News Nightly's Jason Calvi and Mark Irons are on their way to New Orleans tonight. They'll have on-site coverage beginning tomorrow. Up next,
I'm going to improve my life by exercising more, exercising my mind more.
But will that be enough? Tonight, a new medical experiment that could help arrest Alzheimer's. And teacher tenure. Does it protect academic freedom or keep bad apples from being fired? A judge is weighing in. On Tuesday, June 10th, you're watching EWTN News Nightly. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Students and teachers are enjoying summer vacation, but a new decision could impact the teaching profession. A judge has ruled that California's teacher tenure law is unconstitutional. A group of students actually challenged the law, saying it's next to impossible to fire bad teachers. But lawyers for the teachers say tenure laws are meant to ensure academic freedom. Well, an estimated 35 million people worldwide have Alzheimer's disease. As baby boomers like me age, that number is expected to grow. But there is hope tonight that a new global experiment may cut into those numbers.
Oh boy.
70-year-old Pete Bristol doesn't have Alzheimer's yet, but he's doing what he can to prevent it.
I'm going to improve my life by exercising more, exercising my mind more.
Bristol is the first volunteer to receive an IV infusion in an ambitious Alzheimer's prevention study. The disease runs in his family, and a scan shows he has another risk factor, plaque on the brain that may lead to Alzheimer's debilitating dementia.
Amyloid plaque builds up 10, 20 years before people develop the dementia or the memory loss. So just like we test for cholesterol to see who's at risk for heart attack or for a stroke and treat them before that occurs, that's what we're trying to do now for Alzheimer's disease.
Dr. Risa Sperling is leading the 3-year study, which will include 1,000 healthy seniors with normal memory and some brain plaque. They'll be infused with either an experimental drug or placebo at facilities in the U.S., Canada, and Australia. In previous studies, the drug slowed mental decline in patients with mild disease, raising hopes it could even be more effective if used earlier. Pete Bristol says he's going into the study with his eyes wide open, unsure of what his fate will be. He hopes science can stop the progression of Alzheimer's before memory loss even starts. And without significant progress combating the disease, the number of Alzheimer's patients is expected to triple in the next 20 to 30 years as we live longer. Well, thank you for watching tonight. We're back tomorrow. We're on 5 nights a week now, and until tomorrow, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch again anytime on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night, and may God bless you.